We're here in Los Angeles where it's 69 degrees. It's a beautiful day. We're about to have a policy debate, number 2, on climate change. Specifically, we're going to address the question that the U.S. should unilaterally reduce carbon emissions regardless of whether China, India, and developing countries cooperate. I repeat, the U.S. should unilaterally reduce carbon emissions regardless of whether China, India, and developing countries cooperate. For the government, Miranda and Sam. For the opposition, Niaz and Charlie. The chair will entertain and call to the podium the leader of government for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length. That.
My name is Miranda Lopez, and I would like to thank you for being here today to listen to our proposal in favor of the fact that the U.S. should unilaterally reduce carbon emissions regardless of whether China, India, and developing countries cooperate. I'm here to help you not just recognize a problem that we are facing, but to realize that there is in fact a solution. I ask you to leave behind the stigmas, to look beyond the stereotypes, and open your eyes to a new perspective for the way that we can reduce carbon emissions as a united nation. The criteria for this debate is whether the U.S. should unilaterally reduce carbon emissions should be based on whether the benefits significantly outweigh the costs. You should grant adherence to the side that presents the best supporting evidence. So what is the problem? Electricity and energy are an essential part of daily life for the U.S. and other developed nations. As nations continue to develop, so will the demand for energy. Unfortunately, as we've seen in the U.S., all of the energy contributes to worldwide carbon emissions. What's the big deal with carbon emissions? This all stems from problem 1. Greenhouse gas emissions, more specifically carbon emissions, are negatively affecting the environment and contributing to global warming. It is essential to recognize the link between global warming, fossil fuels, the need for low-carbon energy sources, and nuclear energy. In 2007, the IPCC reviewed global warming and reached the consensus that the phenomenon is real and does pose a significant environmental threat, even if fossil fuel usage were to continue at the same rate that it is now. In The Skeptical Environmentalist from 2001, environmentalist Bjorn Lomborg points out the 2 central drivers determining CO2 emissions are total energy consumption and share of energy from fossil fuels. Thus, the most effective way to reduce carbon emissions is to reduce fossil fuel usage. We will focus on 3 points: the environment, the economy, and personal health. What we propose for our alternative source of energy is nuclear energy. Before you all duck and cover or hide under your desk because I just dropped, pun intended, the word nuclear, please listen to our 3 remaining problems and the ability of nuclear energy to fix them. Beginning with the environment is problem number 2. The United States is the leader of the world, and if they don't take the first step forward to reduce carbon emissions, no other major industrialized country will. And this will leave future generations with an even shorter timeline to make drastic environmental improvements. According to the EIA, the U.S. is the number 2 contributor to carbon dioxide emissions behind China. Lomborg points out a multitude of environmental issues from carbon emissions and global warming, including severe storms, energy and water supply issues, loss of biomes, species, human life, pollution, the list goes on and on. To fix these, the MIT study of the future of nuclear power from 2003 suggests that nuclear power is one of the most significant options for meeting future world energy needs at a low cost and in an environmentally acceptable manner. This is perfect. For economics, we will now raise problem number 3. If developing countries don't see the U.S. taking the lead, they will be less likely to make economic changes in order to deal with the problems of global warming and the need to reduce carbon emissions during their development. Lomborg recognizes reducing greenhouse gas emissions should be the responsibility of the developed world. And in 2007, John Houghton said that the United States should reduce their own emissions as rapidly as possible and then assist developing countries with resources and skills to develop their own energy and other requirements in sustainable ways. Lastly, in terms of personal health, is problem number 4. Not implementing a carbon reduction policy could lead to major health problems in the U.S. that other industrialized countries, including China, are already struggling with. A 2006 article from The Lancet points out that there could be more deaths by heat, more bacteria being spread, increased allergies, more diseases spread in hot weather, etc. And a World Health Organization study in 2011 says approximately 1.34 million people die prematurely from PM10 particles, which are pollution particles that can get into your lungs. I do not want to be one of those 1.34 million people. I do not want to have to wear a mask to go outside to walk my dog. I do not want to become even more obsessive compulsive and use hand sanitizer to avoid diseases being spread in warmer weather. Why must we address these problems? Like Lomborg said, if we want to avoid some of the negative outcomes associated with global warming, we must reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide. The UN predicts that population worldwide is going to increase from 6.7 billion to 9.2 billion by 2050. More people, more energy, more carbon emissions, more climate change. So now we see why, so we must see how. In a 2008 interview, Patrick Moore, Greenpeace co-founder, says, "Nuclear plays the most important role of any technology in reducing carbon emissions. Our policy will align with the analytic framework for structuring nuclear project for success presented by the World Nuclear Association, updated in 2015. We will use nuclear as our primary source of energy and plan to build 300 reactors in total." So there's 100 right now, we want to up it to 300. "We will acquire investment and financing from major power companies and private investors, agree to utilize nuclear power as the primary source of energy, maintain safety once installed, implement a policy for long-term storage of waste, and recycle waste that can be recycled. In the meantime, we'll penalize carbon emissions through direct carbon taxes to be directly used for the building and strengthening of nuclear energy. As we implement this policy, we also will work to reduce the perceptions and misconceptions of nuclear power fears. It will take approximately 10 years to implement this fully, and we need time, money, and your support to succeed. If the U.S. shows leadership, other nations will follow. It's our goal to present innovative technologies that will help the rest of the world. Decreased carbon emissions and increased benefits of nuclear power means cleaner air, less pollution, reduced risks of global warming, environmental harm, nationwide, and eventually global economic benefits. Undoubtedly, there's a great fear surrounding nuclear accidents, but these are all from past generators, and those are not being built anymore. Now we have Generation 3, Generation 3+, and Generation 4. Although the transitional costs will be high, it will benefit us in the long run. And we must not consider just the occasional days where we can't see the Los Angeles skyline. Instead, we must consider our children and our children's children and recognize that the unforeseeable future may be more grim than we can even imagine unless we take action now. Thank you, and I stand open for questioning.
Thank you very much. Now time for cross-examination. Will the member of government and member of the opposition please come to the front of the podium for a cross-examination period not to exceed 3 minutes in length. Stand close together near the stand. Yes, please. Thank you. Roll.
Hi, Miranda. You have stated that the U.S. has cumulatively emitted more carbon dioxide than China since the 1950s. Is that correct?
Yes.
However, is it true that currently China emits more carbon dioxide annually than the U.S. does?
At this exact moment, China does emit more, but that's only been in the last 3 years that the U.S. became number 2.
Okay, thank you. You have stated that America is a leader and that if America does not take the first steps forward, no other major industrialized country will. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you aware Are you aware that the U.S. passed a legislation in a first step towards nationalized healthcare in 2010 with a law known as Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the number?
Focus on your audience.
Yes,
Don't
sir.
look at her.
Do you know the number of countries that have had fully functioning national health care pre-2010, or in other words, before America took action?
I don't know about healthcare now.
It's 58 countries. You have also stated that developing countries need the United States to take the lead, or they'll be less likely to make changes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that the U.S. banned child labor in 1938 through the Fair Labor Standards Act, but as of 2012, 76 developing countries have been complicit in allowing child labor to happen within their borders?
Yes, but just because the United States takes an action that is not necessarily changing the policy of every other country doesn't mean that it's not going to have improvements for the U.S. and in a long run, other countries as well.
Okay, thank you. Seeing as how we've seen examples of important initiatives such as healthcare be implemented throughout the world without U.S. leadership, and seeing as how U.S. leadership in eliminating child labor has not resonated with developing countries for multiple decades, is it fair to say that there is no actual real guarantee, 100% guarantee, that countries will loyally follow the U.S. mantra of leadership by example?
I'm not suggesting that the U.S. needs to encourage every other country, but I feel like it's the obligation of the U.S. to work to improve something that they've contributed to and a problem they've created, at least in some way.
Thank you. I have no more questions.
Thank you very much. It's now time for the chair to recognize the leader of the opposition for her speech to refute the government's position and not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
Hi, my name is Niaz, and I will present the case that the U.S. should not unilaterally reduce its carbon emissions if China, India, and other developing countries do not participate. Global warming is an issue, but the policy to address this needs to prove that it can make a significant difference. People argue that the U.S. should reduce its carbon emissions because it's a big emitter. However, the U.S. is not the biggest emitter. The 2014 Emission Database for Global Atmospheric Research shows that China, a developing country, was responsible for 29% of world carbon emissions in 2013, more than the US and European Union combined. If we want to target a big emitter, we point to China. In 2014, the International Renewable Energy Agency said that the renewable energy in the world needs to be at least 36% to limit the temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius. Reductions by the U.S. alone do not add up to this. Next, emissions from developing countries are rapidly increasing while U.S. emissions are decreasing. So they are the ones who would make a difference, not the U.S. In 2014, the Edgar report also shows that India's carbon emissions increased by 61% since 2005, and China's increased by 77%. U.S. emissions decreased by 11%. Additionally, the 2013 Energy Information Administration expects developing countries' emissions to be 127% higher than the most developed countries by 2040. In other words, this trend will increase. The solution is obvious. To make a difference on global warming, countries whose emissions are rising need to cut their emissions, not us. One huge flaw of unilateral action is a lack of funding. Renewable energy is expensive. The Department of Energy reported in 2013 that more than $26 billion taxpayer dollars have been spent for renewable energy since 2009. How would we pay for such a costlier policy? Taxes. We will pay through taxes. This solution would hurt our citizens as well as corporations. Another flaw is that cutting emissions greatly hurts the economy without fixing the problem. Bjorn Lomborg says that if we curb emissions to the 1990 level, the net cost of society would escalate to about $4 trillion. This is a huge cost. The burden would fall on the lower and middle class, who would have to scrape through their earnings to pay for renewable energy. So this is a moral question. Should we cut our emissions and hurt our citizens because we want to reduce global warming by just a slice? Unilateral action causes great damage domestically without making a difference. The costs outweigh the benefits. Unilateral action will not work. Without the participation of developing countries, we will not improve the global environment, which is supposed to be our goal. In 2014, Andrew Morris from the Property and and Environment Research Center, and author of more than 50 scholarly articles, said that one country acting alone has the same impact as doing nothing. This is because any little gain made by the U.S. will easily be replaced by the constant emissions in the developing world who have no limits. He says that even if the U.S. cuts emissions by 25%, growth from just China would replace our efforts in less than 2 years. Moreover, the 2014 IPCC report states that, quote, mitigation will not be achieved if individual agents advance their interests independently. International cooperation is therefore required to effectively mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. The IPCC is telling us that unilateral action will not work. To significantly improve the global environment, we need joint participation of several high emitters. For example, if we take just China, India, and the US, we'd be reducing our emissions by 50%, which is a huge difference. So unilateral action will not solve the issue. Our efforts will be worthless. Furthermore, the plan will not work because it makes the same faulty mistake as a previous plan, the Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto failed to reduce worldwide greenhouse gas emissions because of one problem. It excluded the developing world. A unilateral policy will also make the same mistake. The Energy Information Administration from 2013 shows that China's carbon emissions increased by 3,000 million metric tons during the years that Kyoto was put into place. China was not alone. India and other countries also continued to increase rather than decrease their emissions while the treaty was put into place. Furthermore, the latest spring 2015 annual greenhouse gas index shows that global carbon levels continued to increase since the treaty went into effect, thus rendering a treaty a failure. Kyoto shows us that even if a handful of developed countries work together to reduce emissions, the problem will never be solved if developing nations are excluded. This is the very reason why unilateral action will not work. No matter how much the developed world works in reducing its emissions, its efforts will be masked by the dirty and constant emissions of China, India, and the developing world. The government claims that unilateral action will set a trend for the international world to follow. However, this hopeful wish will not be followed. In The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, John Mearsheimer, a noteworthy international relations theorist, says that countries aim to increase their economic growth in order to maximize their relative power. One such country is China, who is competing to beat U.S. power with its rapid economic growth. Reducing emissions would slow its economic growth, but developing countries and China are not willing to do this, so they will not follow the U.S. Additionally, a unilateral policy would actually deter countries from taking action. Countries will see someone else doing the work for them, so they will continue emitting. This is known as social loafing. This is the opposite of what we are going for, and a clear disadvantage of the plan. Thus, U.S. initiative would not encourage other countries to reduce their emissions. Proponents of unilateral action may say that U.S. cuts will nevertheless lower greenhouse gases by a little, and a little could add up. However, this is not true. As Kyoto showed us, global carbon levels will increase regardless. And despite U.S. reductions, developing countries will still be emitting without any limitations. So everything we do will quickly be covered up by their mess. And as I already stated, even if U.S. cuts its emissions, Chinese emissions would replace our efforts in less than 2 years. These messy polluters will counteract what we tried to say. So this advantage is clearly not an advantage, but a disadvantage. This policy fails to satisfy our criteria that the benefits significantly outweigh the costs. Therefore, the U.S. should not unilaterally reduce carbon emissions without the participation of China, India, and developing countries. Thank you. I am now ready for cross-examination.
Thank you very much. Would you come to the front of the podium and stand for cross-examination? Thank you so much. You can bring your script if that would be helpful to you. You may refer to it. Stand a little closer together. They don't bite.
You say that unilateral action will not work, and reducing carbon emissions will only be effective if developing countries participate, correct?
Yeah.
Do you know the amount of carbon emissions emitted by developing countries versus developed countries?
like 50% by developing countries. I'm not exactly 100%
Yes.
sure.
So the most recent report said 41% for developed and 59% for developing. So do you not think that 41% is still a significant amount if developing countries were not to participate?
I think it's a significant amount, but the U.S. itself is not going to do anything. And as the Kyoto Protocol showed us, that developing worlds were trying to reduce their emissions, it did not reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we need the developing worlds whose emissions are increasing to help us.
Okay. So do you think that just because the U.S. is not the biggest emitter means that it's not having a significant effect on the environment?
I don't think the U.S. effect is significant. I cited that they need the international renewable energy, so that 36% of emissions need to be reduced, and the U.S. by itself would not be reducing these emissions. And also, carbon is just 15%. The 15% just represents carbon emissions. So there's also nitrous oxide, methane that would make a difference. So 15% is smaller than it actually is.
Aligning with the fact that you say that U.S. emissions are not significant, I would just like to point out that just 1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide would be over 2 billion miles driven 1 year in a car, just to put that into perspective. You say that cutting emissions would greatly hurt the U.S. economy, correct?
Yes.
Could you please elaborate how switching to our plan of nuclear energy would hurt the economy?
First of all, it's really expensive. We either have to pay taxes or they subsidize, which is another way to they get money for subsidies through taxes. So the U.S. consumers would have to be paying a lot to pay for the taxes for renewable energy.
To clarify, no country currently or has ever subsidized nuclear energy, and we do not plan to be the first to do that. Additionally, creating nuclear energy as the primary source of energy would create approximately a minimum of 105,000 jobs for people to fuel the economy even further. You say that unilateral action will not work because of the risk of social loafing, correct?
Yep.
Do you think developing nations do not ever look to the United States as a model?
Not really. I don't think they actually do look at it as a model. So it depends on what. If something hurts its economy, they wouldn't follow the U.S. So reducing emissions would be hurting its economy, and they'd be put into further poverty than they already are.
So if our plan did succeed in using nuclear energy as a model that shows amazing benefits and tremendous success, do you think that a developing nation would never want to adopt this model?
Once, if it ruins their economy and their standard of living, I don't think they would try to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. It is now time to hear from the deputy member of the government for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length. That would be Sam Mansfield.
Hi everyone, I'm Sam, and I'm here to tell you why our policy proposal is so crazy it just might work. Why our plan to switch our main energy source to nuclear power is the best one you'll hear. But why do we even have a problem to fix? Well, it's all because greenhouse gas emissions, but more specifically carbon emissions, are negatively affecting the environment and contributing to global warming. The issue we're talking about today is whether the United States needs to do something about it, and our answer is yes. The United States is thought of as the leader of the free world, and if we don't take the first step towards reducing carbon emissions, no other major industrialized country will. This will leave future generations with an even shorter timeline to make drastic environmental changes. Since its creation, the U.S. has been a leader for many issues, and this one should be no different. President Obama and the White House recognize that it's our job to lead international efforts to address global climate change. The United States alone has a huge impact on the amount of carbon emissions released and their effect on global warming. According to a study done by the World Resources Institute in 2012, since 1950, the U.S. has emitted a cumulative total of roughly 50.7 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the air. 50.7 billion with a B. China, another major industrialized country, has emitted only 15.7 billion tons since 1950. This is coming from a country that has a population 4.6 times as large as the United States. That's as if for each class of 30 people in the United States, there's a class of 138 people in China, and that over the last 65 years, our group of 30 people has emitted more than double the amount of carbon dioxide as 138 people in China combined. And our comparison to India is a similar situation. We have to recognize that there's a good way to lower our carbon emission average through nuclear energy. But don't just take our word for it. According to MIT professors, nuclear energy is a huge untapped market with enormous potential to be an energy source, as it would not emit any carbon dioxide or any other atmospheric pollutants. Another major problem we face is that if developing countries don't see the United States take the lead, they'll be less likely to make economic changes in order to deal with the problems of global warming and the need to reduce carbon emissions during their own development. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 2007 noted that an effective way to address the impacts of climate change is by helping developing countries figure out the best way to develop sustainable energy. However, this will not get done unless the United States leads the way by showing it's economically feasible and what a powerful resource nuclear energy can be. If the U.S. can prove this, as I know we can, developing countries will be motivated to use similar resources as us and use this zero-emission product. Another issue we face is that not implementing a carbon reduction policy could lead to major health problems in the United States that other industrialized countries, such as China, are already struggling with. A 2008 study done by Mark Jacobson, a professor at Stanford, found that for each increase of 1 degree Celsius caused by carbon dioxide, the resulting air pollution would lead annually to 1,000 air pollution-related deaths. Even scarier, the effects are worse in our very own state, California. Think about our future. What will be causing deaths for the next generation? As Miranda said, we must respond now so that our children and our children's children can live happy and sustainable lifestyles. Though it may be hard to imagine, your great-grandchildren need you. We don't want to get to a point in the United States where a child is born and immediately put into a mask because the air quality is so bad. Today, people walk around China this way, with a mask covering their mouth and nose, and they advise guests and visitors to do the same. We do not want this to become an American reality as well, and it doesn't have to. So what can we do to make this change? Switch to nuclear energy. We know that our policy cannot happen immediately, so we would like to implement a tax to reduce carbon emissions in the meantime. Our estimates show that it will take about 10 years to make a full transition, and our hope for the tax would be to greatly reduce companies' outputs and use the money raised from the tax, along with the money we'd be saving on fossil fuels, to fund the nuclear generators. Now, my opposition will tell you that other countries will simply free ride off of America, making such a huge change, that they'll enjoy the benefits of us cleaning our air and not make a difference themselves. My opponent is wrong. People can only live in dire situations for so long, and global warming is causing more serious climate changes than ever before. People are going to be looking for answers and solutions. If not now, soon, really soon. When they see us taking such big steps forward, successfully, they'll be motivated to change their lives for the better as well, especially in developing countries who are often affected the most. Now, my opponent will also mention that if the U.S. has to suffer economic disadvantages for a global cause, other countries should too. And while I see what he's saying, we have to look at a bigger picture. The U.S. is in the top 8% of the world financially, according to the CIA. We are a superpower and the leader of the free world, and people expect the U.S. to give to developing countries to become democratic, to fight severe poverty and in times of natural disaster. Why is this any different? We shouldn't stop pledging aid to these developing nations simply because no one's filming the effects of global warming and putting it on the news. America is known for our ability to help others. Why stop now? Our option is currently the only one that doesn't emit any carbon dioxide or other atmospheric pollutants into the air, making it a clean energy source. It's also a realistic one, as there is already a site where we could build a waste repository in Nevada. But more importantly, it's durable. A study by the Nuclear Energy Institute done in 2013 found that nuclear energy has the potential to generate 90.9% of our nation's power. Almost 91% of all of our nation's power would be carbon-free without emitting carbon. With this in mind, I ask you to grant adherence to the proposition. I now stand opening.
Thank you. Now time for both students to come forward for a cross-examination period, not to exceed 3 minutes in length. Stand a little closer together, if you might. Thank you. Okay. All right.
Hey, Sam.
Hi.
Are you aware of the process that it takes to get nuclear energy ready for use? So the process called the nuclear fuel cycle.
Yes.
So can you tell me about the process of it?
Pretty much, nuclear energy has not been studied enough to a point where we would have a clean way of creating nuclear power plants. So, as Miranda mentioned, we would want to take 2 to 5 years to continue studying the best way to develop these nuclear power plants, and then another 5 years to build one. It takes 5 years to build one generator.
But what is the cycle? Like, how do they get nuclear energy ready for use?
That I'm not exactly sure.
So, you get it's uranium. They mine, they mill, they fabricate, and they enrich the nuclear energy. So, don't you think that this series of industrial processes that are required to acquire nuclear energy involve a large amount of carbon emissions?
Yes, but we're looking for a long-term solution. We understand that fossil fuels will be continued to be used for the next 10 years, and that goes within creating the nuclear generators. But then for the next 100 years, we could use and rely on the 300 generators that are built.
Right. But every time they want to mine uranium, wouldn't they have to go through this process? Every time they want to mine and transport
part of the 10 years.
And enrich. All right. So you stated that one problem of carbon emissions is that it creates economic concerns, along with environmental and health concerns. What specific economic problems were you referring to?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
So you stated that one problem of carbon emissions is that it creates environmental, health, and economic concerns. What specific economic problems were you referring to?
In terms of economic problems, we were mostly referring to developing countries. So they're often the ones that are most poor and need the most economic help, and the U.S. would be able to offer that to them through providing nuclear energy versus they would have to fight it and figure it out on their own.
Okay. You propose that one of the huge advantages to your solution is that it presents good results for the economy, such as job creation, right? So if you propose economic growth and job creation to be a large benefit, what do you think that an increase in corporation taxes would do to the economy? And you said that this will not be a small feat.
An increase in corporation tax?
Yeah, you would tax corps.
We would be taxing corporations during the 10 years that the nuclear generators would be built, not after they were built, because there would be no more reason. The tax would be simply on carbon emissions.
Right. But do you think that corporations would respond to an increase in taxes by laying off workers?
I don't believe so. The same way that we have a sales tax on every product we buy, it doesn't stop people from buying food, buying clothing, buying products they don't necessarily need.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. What was the time?
4 seconds left.
4 seconds left? Thank you. Okay. The chair will now recognize the deputy member of the opposition for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
Hi, I'm Charlie.
Hi, Charlie.
First off, we would like to mention that the opposition has no disagreement with the government's contention that CO2 is bad for the environment and bad for the health. However, where we do disagree on is that it is our contention, the opposition's contention, that the unilateral move by the United States to reduce carbon emissions will, in actuality, have a negative impact on the environment. A unilateral move will discourage other countries from reducing carbon emissions. If America acts alone on reducing carbon emissions without the cooperation of other countries, it will create a free riders problem wherein other countries benefit environmentally from America's reduction in carbon emission without contributing to the cause. Therefore, any environmental benefit obtained from America's carbon emission reduction will be offset by lack thereof from other countries, especially China, which generates 1/4 of the world's carbon emissions according to the CIA's factbook data for 2014. This is troubling, especially in light of the fact that the U.S. Energy Information Administration has released figures in 2013 that assert that developing countries' carbon emissions will vastly outpace those of the developed nations. On the other hand, if the United States shows resolve that carbon emission reduction is an activity that all countries must cooperate in, the environmental benefit obtained from carbon emission reduction of many countries, including the United States, will be much greater than if the United States acted unilaterally. Thus, the United States should resist a move to reduce carbon emission until a binding agreement has been reached, because this is not only in the best interest of the United States, but also in the interest of the human population in general. More carbon will be reduced overall, which, as the government contends, will have health benefits. This unreliable practice of relying on countries themselves to step up cannot supersede the environmental benefits from the binding agreements that countries will not fail to honor, as there will be repercussions for non-compliance with binding agreements. It is our second contention that the United States will suffer serious economic injury. Reducing carbon emissions is in and of itself an activity that harms the economy. It involves replacing fossil fuels, and machines that use fossil fuels already deeply embedded into our infrastructure, which obligates citizens to spend more money. According to measures in 2011 by National Automobile Dealers Association, average price of new vehicles will increase by $3,100 by 2025 due to the cumulative fuel efficiency rules set forth by the EPA. Government's initiatives to lower carbon dioxide emissions have put a strain on the country's already faltering auto industry. According to EPA's new regulations regarding increasing average MPGs of vehicles, EPA's estimate cost is around $157 billion for the auto companies, to which Wall Street Journal has claimed that since this is an estimate by the EPA, the real number is vastly greater. To achieve the averages set by the EPA, for example, in the city of Detroit, Detroit will have to turn 25% of its fleet into hybrids. However, hybrid sales have peaked in the U.S. at 2009 and are declining at 3% of the market. As the Wall Street Journal has claimed, EPA's $157 billion price tag includes only the estimate of what manufacturers will have to pay to invest in the new technology, not the billions that it will hemorrhage when no one wants to buy their EPA-approved products. Implementing policies that reduce carbon dioxide cost taxpayer money. According to statistics revealed by Ford in 2013, complying with strict rules set by the EPA costs the U.S. economy $333 billion a year. This number will only worsen when U.S. decides to unilaterally reduce carbon. Furthermore, in the era of globalization, wherein a country's economic welfare not only depends on domestic activity, but also on international commerce and politics, America will be put at a American economic disadvantage will be exacerbated by the fact that countries that America is competing with for manufacturing will not incur the similar economic disadvantages. In other words, U.S. would not only experience damages from economic disadvantage itself, but also from the fact that its competitors would not have to incur these similar economic disadvantages. Thirdly, it is our contention that by unilaterally reducing carbon emissions, the U.S. government would actually be committing an unethical act. Being subject to the economic disadvantage associated with carbon emission reduction is not in the best interest of the American people. It imposes tangible damages on countless American citizens whose livelihood will be affected by the economic disadvantage. As the American form of governance is that of a constitutional democracy, the government and the legislature have a duty to zealously represent the interests of their constituencies. And if the American government reduces carbon emission and incurs economic damage as a result, it will have failed to represent the interests of the American people, and it is unethical for the government to neglect the needs and interests of the people. For instance, when the auto industry experiences monetary loss due to carbon emission reduction, that in turn provides less taxable revenue for the government, concomitantly resulting in a diminished capacity for the government to provide necessary services across the board. Defense, welfare, healthcare, social security, and infrastructure. All of these services will have been affected because the U.S. government unilaterally reduced carbon emissions against the will of its people. As a result of this analysis and line of reasoning, the opposition has shown that the cost incurred by the United States in unilaterally reducing carbon emission far outweighs the benefits, including in the realms of environment, economy, and governance. Unilaterally reducing carbon emissions is, in the long run, bad for the environment, as it will encourage other countries to continue their current rate of carbon emissions. Carbon emission reduction, especially unilaterally, places undue strain on the U.S. economy. And the American government cannot claim to have the interests of its people if it places importance on an abstract of a greener earth over the living American people who have elected its officials. I now stand for questioning.
Great. Thank you. Chair will now hear a questioning period from the deputy member of the government who comes to the front of the podium. stand close together, please. Thank you.
Hi, Charlie.
Hi, Sam.
You mentioned that there would be economic auto problems. Are you aware of what the average transaction price for a light vehicle in the United States in November of 2012 was?
Is it $15,000?
Well, according to TrueCar, it's $30,832 for a new car. This was done by a research and forecasting company hired by the Wall Street Journal. Do you happen to know the price of a compact electric car, most notably for either Tesla, BMW, or Nissan?
No, I'm not aware.
As I looked it up. According to Dell's Business News, a Tesla Model 3, an electric car, is $35,000, a BMW i3 is $40,000, and a Nissan Versa is only $15,000. Wouldn't you agree that these prices are very doable for the average citizen who in 2012, 3 years ago, was paying almost $31,000 for a new car with an average that's probably even higher today?
Well, it is our contention that hybrid technology is more expensive, and that can be exemplified by the fact that, for example, Ford Focus is more expensive when it's a Ford Focus hybrid. It costs more, and I don't think it is a fair comparison to compare two different models of cars and only attribute the fact that it's a hybrid to the fact that it's cheaper.
All right. And did you know that electric vehicles don't produce carbon emissions like the normal combustion engines? They just need to regularly recharge?
Yes.
And that you can charge an electric car from a nuclear energy facility, just like the ones Miranda and I are looking to build?
Yes, but it is our contention that nuclear energy is not a viable source of energy currently, and if it is currently... Yes, go ahead, sorry.
And continuing on, you also mentioned that if the American government reduces carbon emission and incurs economic damage as a result, it will have failed to represent the interest of the American people, and it is unethical for the government to neglect the needs and interests of the people, right?
Yes.
Were you aware that according to Nuclear Energy Institute, which is a national organization, each nuclear plant built employs approximately 530 people?
No, I'm not aware.
And along with that, for every 100 direct jobs at a nuclear energy facility, the local economy produces an additional 66 jobs and another 726 jobs throughout America. Were you aware of that?
No.
My partner and I are proposing to build 200 more nuclear energy facilities to generate enough electricity for the United States. When you do the math, that comes out to 106,000 jobs just for the people who are directly employed at the facility, not even including those in the local community and nationwide. Do you consider the minimum of 106,000 jobs to be hurting the economy and the American government's decision to create them unethical?
In the overall, I believe that nuclear energy, yes, it's a wonderful source for our future. However,
answer the question.
Nuclear energy is a great source. However, that doesn't affect the fact that while this new energy is being made viable for the free market by the open market, CO2 reduction multilaterally by many countries would still be much more beneficial for our economy and the environment than unilateral move by the U.S.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, we've come to the end of the constructive period of our debate. It's now time for refutation. And you know what that means. There are 4 steps in refutation. And we'll hear first from the opposition, who hopefully will engage in 4 steps of refutation.
Hello. My partner and I have presented our case that the U.S. should not unilaterally reduce its carbon emissions without the participation of China, India, and developing countries. The government contends that the United States should take the first step toward reducing carbon emissions because it is a leader, and if America does not act, no other industrialized country will. However, we disagree with this. Firstly, there have been several important initiatives that the world has acted on without U.S. leadership. U.S. leadership is not required for the world to act on. It can act on its own. Moreover, just because a country is regarded as a leader does not mean that it must do things for the international community. Addressing the global warming issue is a collective benefit, and the burden on U.S. citizens is very costly compared to the cost it will bring. If someone else causes a problem, is it our obligation to fix it? The U.S. has no obligation to take on such a cost. It has its own citizens to care about. We already have to deal with so many domestic problems that require immediate attention, such as healthcare and immigration, and introducing a new policy that requires us to take full measures could be destructive. Domestic groups will inevitably clash on the government, voicing that it's not our responsibility to pay the cost of the mess of every other country. We would be the ones to pay for this international issue. We would be the ones to take on all the burden. Therefore, the U.S. should not take unilateral action. The costs outweigh any benefits. Moreover, the government claims that the United States unilaterally reducing carbon emissions will oblige other countries to follow suit is groundless. There is simply no diplomatic guarantee that other countries will go against their interests just because the U.S. has done so. Without a binding agreement, this is not possible. The U.S. has led by example on several issues that countries have ignored. An example is labor standards that ban child labor, which 76 countries have not followed. Furthermore, countries are focused more on their economic growth rather than the global warming issue, and switching to cleaner energy poses great economic costs. Other countries may praise the U.S. for taking on such a measure, but that is where it will end. Seeing someone else doing the work for them could discourage them from wanting to take action. Therefore, the U.S. should not take the leading role toward reducing carbon emissions, because the international world will not follow its lead. The government also says that the best solution is to switch to nuclear energy. However, we do not agree that this is the best solution. Although it does not directly emit carbon itself, the entire process of getting nuclear energy ready to use, which includes mining uranium, milling the ore, transportation, enrichment, and fabrication of nuclear fuel, actually leads to a large amount of carbon emissions. So contrary to what the government said, there still will be carbon emissions with nuclear energy. Moreover, with nuclear energy comes nuclear waste, which is highly dangerous if it comes in close proximity to humans. Nuclear waste must be stored, and a slight problem will lead to catastrophic consequences, and this can be lethal. The problems with nuclear energy are far more detrimental to our health than an increase in temperature by 2 or 3 degrees. Therefore, nuclear energy is not the ideal switch we should be doing. The government also says that a good way to reduce carbon emissions is to implement a tax on all corporations that emit carbon in any form. To quote them, they say that it will not be a small fee. However, we do not agree that a corporate tax is an efficient policy. This will lead to drastic and unbearable consequences for the U.S. economy. Corporations would not take this tax lightly. They will respond by laying off workers, decreasing their benefits, and they will simply charge higher prices for the goods and services that we buy. So once again, consumers would be the ones to pay. We would be paying their taxes. Many jobs would be lost as large corporations hand out layoff notices, and therefore imposing a tax on corporations is not a good solution. As we have stated, the U.S. will suffer serious economic injury as a result of such heavy taxation. So this policy does not satisfy the criteria because the costs significantly outweigh the benefits. The government has failed to demonstrate that the benefits outweigh the costs, and thus the opposition contends that adherence should be granted to the assertion that the United States should not unilaterally reduce carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks of refutation. And now it's time for the government to engage in 4 steps of refutation.
Ready?
5 minutes.
I don't know about each of you, but when I see an opportunity in front of me, I weigh the pros and cons, consider all the outcomes, and if it's something that I really want and I think will benefit even a small amount of people, I will take a leap of faith and do everything in my power to make that happen, regardless of if that means embarking on a journey alone. To begin, the opposition says that reducing emissions from the U.S. would not make a big enough difference by itself. It would only make a difference if developing countries reduce carbon emissions as well. We disagree because, first of all, developing nations do not have enough money to do this right now, but they would greatly benefit from a model that they could follow when they can accomplish this. Therefore, developing countries are not the only ones who could make a difference. They say we need to focus on China as a primary target. We disagree because we do not see China as our primary concern or our primary responsibility. Because an EIA report in the New York Times reveals that China's population is not predicted to increase now until 2040 in any substantial way. Thus, they should not have any increased needs for carbon emissions because they will not have increased needs for energy. Therefore, China is not the most important emitter. There is no most important emitter nor sole target for reducing carbon emissions. They say renewable energy is expensive. I agree. Renewable energy is expensive. This is why I suggest nuclear energy. They say that reducing carbon emissions will have a negative impact on the economy. We disagree for multiple reasons. Nuclear energy is efficient, one of the most efficient forms. And that means it'll cost less money to find alternatives when other power goes out because other forms like renewable are not as reliable. Building generators will also create jobs, as noted, at minimum of 106,000 people. Nuclear energy also has very low operational costs. And if we improve the quality of life now, we won't have to pay so much to fix it later. I'd like to point out that the World Nuclear Association says that nowhere in the world is nuclear energy subsidized, and we do not plan to do that either. Instead, we would just penalize those who use excessive amounts of carbon for the time being, and that money would go directly to the funding of building nuclear reactors, so there's no need for an additional tax. They say that unilateral action will not work and will not set a trend for the international world to follow. We disagree, because both developing nations and developed nations are primarily concerned with guaranteeing the success of their nation. Therefore, unilateral action will improve the United States, prevent the state of the world as a whole from getting worse, and inspire the rest of the world to action. The United States is capable of extraordinary feats of accomplishment, as we've all seen growing up and looking back in history. We cannot let our fear get in the way of progress. Just because the United States is not the #1 lead in carbon emissions, that doesn't mean that reducing carbon emissions in the U.S. unilaterally will not have a profound effect on global emissions in the long run. To put into perspective from an EPA converter, 1 million metric tons of CO2 is equivalent to over 2 billion miles driven in a car and over 102 million gallons of gasoline. That does seem pretty significant to me. Our opposition says that it is unethical to reduce carbon emissions. We believe just the opposite. Regardless of what other nations do, we feel that it is our responsibility and moral obligation to look out for everyone else, improve the environment, help the economy, and improve the quality of life in whatever way we can. As Sam said, if we look at the last 65 years, we have been the biggest contributor. We might not be the biggest contributor at this exact moment, but are we just going to wait until the U.S. catches up? How much is too much? And if serious problems could be avoided, future issues could be prevented, why would we wait to act now? MIT, the World Nuclear Association, the Nuclear Energy Institute, countless research projects all reveal that actual nuclear energy generation is carbon-free, and this is what we need. Will our policy require a lot of work? Yes, but the benefits will undoubtedly outweigh the costs. Our policy would improve environmental, economic, and personal health issues that are consequences of carbon emissions, both domestically and globally. We have weighed the pros and cons, and we are taking great strides to bring this upon ourselves. The U.S. has pledged billions of dollars in foreign aid helping developing countries with climate change. President Obama in 2003 sent a message that coal is not an acceptable fuel source for the 21st century. Obama suggests we need an alternative. The public is asking for alternatives. So here we are. Why not start with the U.S. and why not start right now? Thank you.
Thank you. You may cross the room and shake hands in a sign of sportsmanship. And we now turn to the judges to individually do their job. Don't look at others' faces. And morale again needs an extra ballot. Oh, God.
I was 7 hours yesterday, laptop.
Okay, Morale. Does anybody else need a ballot?
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. I just wanted to go back the whole time.
Cross X, thank you. Cross X, do you have cross X?
Ours are in our
They're in the brief, okay, good. Miranda, Sam, Caroline. Second. Thank you. Oh.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can you press on the sign-in sheet?
Right. Was it passed around?
No, I didn't. I like that. Do I have all the ballots? Anybody have a stapler?
Yeah, I did.
Can I borrow it? Mine was calculated. Yeah, so serious. Oh, this is a nice one. Can I keep it?
I just noticed there's like a debate group report.
Yeah.
Is that so?
That's coming
That's a
out.
5-minute speech each,
Yeah.
all on the same day.
Yeah. It's gonna be fun.
Okay, cool. It is.
What?
We're running about 15 minutes
It
right
is.
now.
Right now, we need to roll. Okay, do I have all the ballots? Any more ballots? Any more ballots back there? Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, on the question of whether the United States should unilaterally reduce carbon emissions, regardless of whether China, India, and developing countries cooperate, the decision went on a 12-8 decision to the government. Let's start in the rear over there today. Would you do the honor? You know how to Zoom?
Yes, I know how to Zoom.
Okay, it's the top, baby.
Professional at this.
Hi, my name is Shazi, and
Hi, Shazi.
I voted for the government, but honestly, it could have gone either way. I try to keep an open mind about this debate as long as I possibly could. But originally, when I first heard opening arguments, I heard the opening cross-examination, I was biased towards government, but then Charlie came in with his very fast-paced talking and a lot of facts, and I swear to you I swayed toward opposition. But honestly, I believe that government had a more well-rounded argument. They were a lot more poised and passionate about there, and like their facts just seemed to match all of your cross-examination points, and they just had an answer to all of your questions, and it just seemed like I should take a leap of faith into nuclear energy, and so that's why I voted for government.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Colleen.
Hi, Colleen.
And I too thought it was really close, but I ended up voting for the opposition.
Yeah.
You guys spoke really well, and I love how Miranda and Sam, you made it so like personal to the audience, and you had a lot of examples where it's like real life, and we could really like connect to that. And you guys are both really cute and made like cute little jokes. I thought that was really cute. But then,
What does that mean?
They're aesthetically pleasing.
They're cute.
They made like cute
Visually
puns and jokes, and I thought
Oh, I
that was
see.
cute.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Endearing. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
I got it.
But Niaz and Charlie one, you had like real like solid facts about like all the things they talked about to say why they're wrong or why it's faulty. You did speak really fast though, so you lost me in some places because you spoke really, really quick. But I thought while the government's argument was outlined more organized, you guys took their arguments and really spoke about why they were bad. And I think what really won me over is when Niaz, during your cross of Sam, you made it clear that their plan still emitted still emitted CO2. And then I was like, oh, well then, people are going to be raise taxes, people are going to pay more, and still we're going to have CO2. So I think that's what won me over to the opposition.
Hi, my name is Meral.
Hi, Merle.
I actually voted for the government this time. This one was pretty difficult. I thought you guys all did a really good job, but Miranda and Sam, you guys both really kind of won me because you were very passionate and very extemporaneous. I really felt like you knew what you were talking about based on not only the facts, but the fact that you were kind of like looking up and more of telling a story than just reading an outline. The opposition, though, Charlie and Niaz, I think you guys both did really well. You did speak a little fast and lose me sometimes, but your facts were great. I was going back and forth a lot until the rebuttal. That's what won me over 100%, because I was kind of unsure of my decision, because, I mean, like everyone says, there's always a counterfact for a fact, so I was really back and forth, but it might have partially been because that was the lasting impression, but I think Miranda's rebuttal was kind of stronger, and you really hit every single point. And for me, your reasons that you gave for arguing the way you did were just very valid, and they just made a lot of sense in my head. So I voted for you guys based on presentation and the actual facts, but you guys both did amazing.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Aubrey. I granted adherence to the government side, and for me it was very back and forth. What made me give it to the proposition side was the fact that you guys were really strong in your cross-examination questions and your refutations. I felt you guys found a lot of holes in their argument, and then you also responded to them really well, which is important for both. As a whole, I felt all of you guys had a lot of good points to like go over pathos, egos, and logos. I just liked the proposition side was you guys were like concerned, but you were also really sincere about it, which I felt was really important and granted. It made me trust you guys more. And then Charlie, I thought you had a lot of great points. My only problem is and also granted, you went a little later in the debate, so sometimes like it's hard to like regain my attention. But you made a lot of good points. I just wish I was able to hear them more and really comprehend them. But yeah, great job to everyone.
Okay. We're running a little late because of passing out the exam, so if we can make our comments a little more compact, that would be swell.
Okay, hi, I'm Lexi.
Hi, Lexi.
I ended up voting for the government, but like everyone else has said, this was actually a really hard decision for me. I think that what swayed me in the end was that Miranda and Sam, you guys were super passionate about everything you said, and I think that you kind of made it more audience-friendly in your speech. Charlie, you did speak a little bit too quickly for me to like pay attention the entire time, but you guys had really great facts as well. But I think the performance is really what won me over for the government.
Hi, Amanda. Like everyone said, it was really close, but I ended up siding with the opposition just because in the end, since it was so close, I just felt that I wasn't fully convinced that the benefits would outweigh the costs, so that's why I voted for the opposition.
Hi, I'm Gabby.
Hi, Gabby.
I also voted for the opposition, although I personally think that Sam and Miranda did a better job overall. But the reason that I gave it to the opposition was because I don't think that the policy itself was really great. Like, I don't think that I think that the costs outweighed the benefits in this particular policy, but I think you guys did a really great job.
Okay.
Hi, Mackenzie.
Hi, Mackenzie.
I voted for the opposition. I think that Sam and Miranda actually articulated your points a lot better. I thought you guys were better speakers. Like we said, Charlie, you just spoke way too fast. It was a struggle to listen. But ultimately, you guys had a big uphill battle for me because nuclear energy is so problematic, especially when we're talking about environmental conservation. So I sided with the opposition. I thought they made stronger points. It wouldn't have been so close, though, had the opposition honed in more on that. If you guys had talked about California only has one nuclear reactor because of all the environmental concerns around it. If you guys had really harped on that a lot more, I think it would have been so much more easily convinced by you guys early on. So.
Hi, I'm Shodai.
Hi, Shodai.
I voted for the opposition side, and that's mainly because the government side didn't really have any evidences that like other countries would follow them if they took action, and they had some like examples from the past where like other countries didn't follow or like other countries took action before the U.S. took action. So that's why I sided for the opposition.
Hi, my name is Guyana.
Hi, Guyana.
You guys both had great
Guyana.
arguments, and they contradicted each other, so it was really hard for me to decide at the end. I was going to go with the government, especially at the rebuttal, because you had a really strong rebuttal, Miranda. But then when I thought about it, I just wasn't completely convinced by the government's arguments, especially because the policy was that the U.S. should unilaterally reduce them now, even if other countries don't cooperate, and it seemed like your argument relied on the assumption that other countries would eventually
cooperate, and there was just no proof of that even. So I had to give it to the opposition.
Hi, I'm Garrett.
Hi, Garrett.
So this debate was probably one of my favorites. Usually I just judge the whole thing off presentation. And I mean, not the whole thing, I mean definitely.
That's honest.
I'm not done. A lot, and if you have good arguments. I mean, the arguments are pretty strong on both sides. Charlie, you did a really good job. Especially with one question stuck in my head was about the cars and how they're expensive, and you just said, I mean, you wiped it out. But Miranda brought me back over with her closing statement, which was really strong. Like, you demand the floor. I mean, you're a little cute little girl, but you're very fierce when you're up there, so it was really good. So I just, on a whim, I mean, I gave you all the same score, but the government ended up having it, but good job.
Hi, my name is Ariella. I think this is definitely my favorite debate, and maybe I'm biased because they're part of my group. I thought you guys did a really amazing job. I was really impressed by all of you. Your speaking styles were all pretty good. You did go a little fast, but it was okay. I did go for the government because I kind of felt like Sam and Miranda were two sides of a coin. Like, Miranda came in and was really enthusiastic and really animated and like really laid it down, and then Sam came in and was like really calm and almost like a PBS commercial and was able to just like make it seem really clear and understandable and be like, yeah, this totally makes sense and you should follow us. And so I did, but I did think that you guys did a really good job, and I was really impressed by all of you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Yasmin, and I voted for the government. Miranda, in your cross-examination, you made a point that only until recently the United States has been knocked off for that #1 spot in emissions. So Niaz, when you came in and you opened with like, oh, in 2014, this, I don't know what country it was, you gave a percentage of like the emissions that they got. It kind of knocked it off because I was like, oh, but that's only been so recently because of Miranda's statement. And then Sam, you made a really good point of like short-term contribution can lead to long-term benefits, and I really like that. Charlie, I liked how you really brought in that unilateral element, and I think you really could have killed it with that. But you went all fast forward, so I kind of tuned out. And then ultimately I gave adherence to government. Sorry.
Okay. It's honest.
Hi, my name's Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
I voted for the government. Eventually, it was a super hard debate to the point that like I had no idea how to rank you guys. Like, you all did such a good job. I thought you guys did a really good job of using logic. You really like brought the facts, but you actually explained why they were important and why they supported your argument. But ultimately, the government used pathos a lot better, in my opinion, and for me that's really important. When I feel like an emotional connection, when I feel like you're really talking to me, Miranda, when you personalized it at the very beginning of your second speech, when you were like, you know, if it was me, I would really do something if I can help just a few people, and that really resonates with me, so that was ultimately why.
Hello, I'm Sol.
Hi, Sol.
I voted for the government, mostly because, honestly, for me, I tried to go into this completely, like, without any other things coming in, like, okay, you guys proposed nuclear energy. I do have my opinions on that, but I didn't let that get in the way, and I just thought that the opposition did not do a sufficient job at all at addressing that. Like, Niaz, at the end, you finally addressed, and I was like, yes, like, why didn't we hear more of this? Like, I feel like you guys focused way too much on this, like, the unilaterally thing, and you didn't focus on the policy at hand, and so that's why they were able to convince me that this policy was going to be great, and that with the 10-year plan, I thought was really intelligent, and it was only, like, the carbon within those 10 years, and then it's a long-term thing, it's durable. So I just think that if you guys had just attacked all the bad things that can come along with nuclear energy, it could have been a very, very different debate. So just keeping that in mind.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chloe.
Hi, Chloe.
I granted adherence to the government as well. I agree with Sol. Something I was looking for from the opposition that I didn't get was showing why it's bad if everyone follows and showing why it's bad if no one follows. Because then either way, you show that this plan won't work. I was sort of waiting for, well, if everyone follows and if everyone starts using nuclear energy, are we going to have like a nuclear arms race? That's something that could happen. We're looking at Iran, things like that. I think something like that would have been interesting, would have kind of changed the debate. I thought that the government side was very clear and concise and easy to follow, but I thought that you guys also had some strong points. I was just looking for a little bit more.
Hi, my name is Jasmine.
Hi, Jasmine.
I kind of went in it with the same perspective as Sol. Like, I just tried to put everything that, like, my opinions on nuclear energy and how that would work. I put that, like, aside and just, like, on the basis of the argument, I didn't feel like the opposition shut down the policy that the government had proposed well enough.
So that's why I sided with the government, because the benefits seem to outweigh the cost for me in the argument.
Okay, good.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I voted for the opposition. I thought you guys did an incredible job. For one, I didn't like in the Miranda's closing speech, she's like, she presented one of your arguments as such that you said it was unethical, reducing carbon emissions, which was just totally not fair because you guys never said that. You said that the manner in which you did it, namely that the economic cons that would come about was unethical. So I thought that was kind of manipulative, and then the way in which you spoke was really appealing. But I thought that you guys just like, your points were so well put, and your cross-examination, your answers were so good, Charlie. So,
thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Steve.
Hi,
I
Steve.
sided with the opposition. I really enjoyed how the government pointed out eventually other companies will have to stop using fossil fuels and transition, so we would get a head start. But ultimately I gave adherence to the opposition because they pointed out their policy will ultimately hurt both the economy and the environment.
So my name is Tao.
Hi, Tao.
I sided with the government. I thought that both sides did really good, on factual wise. You guys both have really great evidence, but I really like Miranda's and Sam's presentation style more. Charlie, I think you have some of the best facts in the debate, but again, other people said that you were too fast, and that kind of made it difficult for me to kind of follow along with what you were saying. And I thought that you were also kind of a bit of technical and jargony in your argument. And they still had good facts, but they kind of conveyed it in a much more understandable way for audiences. So yeah, so that's what I kind of said. Yeah.
Okay. Is that everyone? Okay. Let me make a couple of quick comments. What's our time like? We have 12 minutes. Okay, good. Let me put this. When we look at whether the U.S. should unilaterally reduce carbon emissions, we were trying to get at the question of if we do, is it going to make a difference in the overall scope of things of helping the overall planet? And it seems to me that that's what the opposition was trying to get at. And they made a pretty persuasive case that it wasn't going to help the planet because of what China and India and the developing countries were up to. On the other hand, we had a wonderful affirmative case. Maggie Thatcher's nuclear power case, really, and you can't deny that there's not going to be. It doesn't contribute to global warming. Zip contributions. I do think, though, when you saw the disclosure, was this a surprise to you that they were going to run nukes? Or was this shocking to you?
No, they disclosed everything fully.
What?
They disclosed everything fully.
Yes, I know. But what I'm saying is when you saw they were going to run nukes, you needed to pivot a little in your strategy so that you ran not only disadvantages to the unilateralness, but also disadvantages to nukes. Because this is what people out here, Chloe and other people were saying, that, there's a whole reservoir of feelings out here. People have looked at what happened in Japan, and there's a whole lot of enthymemes out here that, we closed down San Onofre, and we only have one operating nuclear power plant in all of California now because we're real worried about it. And so you have half the battle won out here with this audience, and you could have pivoted a little, still run the same arguments you ran, and capitalize and run some disadvantages to their proposal. I thought you guys worked beautifully together. And I agree, we're more likable. And I'm not saying you're not likable. I like Niaz a lot, and I like your arguments, but I didn't like Charlie's delivery. You alienated me with the way you spoke, and I think you alienated some of the audience. And I know philosophy majors can take that and can just listen to the facts and not be alienated by how it's being presented. And that's, I respect that. That's fine. That's good. But that's not always how it works. Go ahead.
Let me preface this by saying I think most of you know by now that I'm a little bit of a jerk, so don't expect a ton of bad stuff out of me. That being said, this is actually the best debate I've seen so far. This was actually pretty damn good. There was a lot of areas I thought what was kind of interesting was sheerly point-by-point basis, government I think did a significantly better job. Opposition did a very, very good job of very adequately presenting some really, really good fallacies. And I said it because people have to understand that fallacies, they're wrong, you shouldn't be using them, but that being said, they can often be persuasive. One of the primary ones that you guys were using frequently was a lot of false analogies, straw men. Basically, it's one thing, it's not an official fallacy, but people call it, the fallacy of scale. And what you're basically saying is that one thing is equivalent to another in terms of scale. One of the primary ones that you're going on about is how you still produce CO2 emissions when you're mining for uranium and processing it. Let's contrast how much it costs for a truck to go out there to mine this stuff, to process it and all that, versus all of the oil freaking refineries in America. There's kind of a difference in scale here, right? Yeah. So again, you guys made a false equivalency in that regard. You also did this quite a few times in your speech. That being said, it was very persuasive. You pulled it off. I think you actually managed to convince a lot of people. Government, I think that you guys could have done a better job of defending some of their reputations of you. Charlie, during his cross-examination of you guys, did a fantastic job of showing that the U.S. is not a policy leader. And he came off with a couple good examples. The Kyoto Protocol is probably the better one. How about you just come out and say, Israel-Palestine, we do that. Freaking Pakistan, India, we do that. Formation of freaking League of Nations, formation of the UN, formation of the World Trade Organization, all the U.S. Come out with all of these things. Like, how can you even pretend that the U.S. is not a policy leader? This is not even worth our time. Freaking, you might want to move on to a better line of questioning. Let's go, let's go in something else. A certain level of cockiness can really, really help you sometimes. Because to be honest, that's such an easy to shut down argument that you should basically go like, you're wasting my time, let's talk about something more important.
But you had to have them at hand and ready to go.
I was going to throw the democracy card, it wasn't strong enough.
It's just overplayed.
Yeah.
Welcome to do that. So I think that Charlie got away with a lot of stuff that you shouldn't have let him get away with. But that being said, that's not to negate from the fact that, Charlie, you presented it rather well. You did a very good job of making it seem like in this whole entire debate you have a bunch of freaking debaters here, and then someone hired a freaking an out-of-class expert to come in here and tell us how things really are. You came off extremely authoritatively, and I really like that. You actually came off very well. I actually don't mind the speed as much as most people do. I thought that you just came across as, I've got a lot of shit to say, let's get down to business. Came off very well for me. Let's see, freaking, I don't know why you guys went with a carbon tax. I thought that was a very, very bad idea. Because you bit all of these harms. I think reallocation of oil subsidies would have been a much better idea. You're already getting rid of oil in this, of our oil usage, so take all those oil subsidies, move them over to nuclear, and now you have no economic disadvantages whatsoever.
You didn't need it.
Yeah.
You didn't need it.
Let's see. Okay, you spent quite a bit of time telling us why you need to reduce CO2 levels. I think that was a little bit of a waste of your time because they'd already granted that we don't have to worry about that. They already agree it's a bad thing. On top of that, that's not what this argument's really about, so I wouldn't spend quite as much time on that. Let's see. I really liked you're talking about masks and hand sanitizer and all that kind of stuff. You did a good job of relating it to the average individual out here. Everyone can kind of relate. Like, hey, I don't want to wear a mask all the damn time. I don't want to sanitize my hands every 5 minutes. It brought this down from a purely academic level to a more relatable one. Next time, and this is for everybody, if you ever go over cost-benefit analysis, don't say that we have to significantly show benefits. It's not. It's cost-benefit. Is the benefit more than the cost? Not significantly. You just place a greater burden upon yourself that you don't have to do. Let's see. There was a bit of a straw man out of opposition one, so that was Niels? Yeah. During your cross-ex, or no, whoever did the first cross-ex anyways. Talking about we should, and then freaking healthcare, immigration, all that kind of stuff. No relevance to the case whatsoever. So I hope that the audience recognized that. I don't know if you guys did or not, but Again, I think it was an effective straw man, but that being said, again, it's a fallacy. You might want to watch out for that. I already talked about the ratios and the scaling. You're also talking about freaking this is going to lead to layoffs and all that kind of stuff. I mean, really, like a tax, if they propose a tax, we're going to have the United States economy crumble. Again, out of scale, out of proportion. Just be careful of making arguments like that because you're really blowing things out of the water. It's kind of like some arguments I've heard from some people have said that if we propose a greater sales tax, it's going to lead to nuclear war. Like, really? You can show that causal link, but you're blowing every single one out of proportion, which is why anyone who's come to my office, as we've talked about, freaking claim warrant impact and the link. And that's actually, you're showing the relevance of this, you're showing how this all ties in together, and I think a lot of the stuff on the opposition side was missing that link. And again, you bid a lot of fallacies, but I think you did a good enough job pulling them off that you did get a pretty close vote.
Yeah, we're not saying you can't argue it, but you got to do a little bit better job of providing the links and documenting it if you're going to argue it.
And to be honest, I'll be the first one to admit, I'm kind of a sophist here. Like, I actually don't mind fallacies. I use them frequently. Just, you're not going to catch me using them. So, make sure if you're going to use a fallacy, hide it well. Let's see. Yeah, that was... oh, by the way, Charlie, I just have to mention freaking... when you pulled out, when you were defending in the cross-ex, and you talked about how basically the car analogy that was being used, I said it was a false analogy, and you showed that, hey, you should be using the same model. Beautiful defense, very well done, completely tore down that entire line of questioning.
Yeah.
There wasn't really much you could do about that. That was a perfect answer. I mean, that was quite literally probably one of the best moments in all the debates I've heard so far. That was the perfect answer. I don't think anyone could have phrased it better. Everything being said, this was actually pretty persuasive and very well done.
By the way, one more comment I want to make. I want to thank these debaters for citing the date and qualifying the evidence for their sources so you could judge when the evidence was and you could make an informed decision. Some of it was a little old, most of it was pretty recent. Continue to cite the date. Thank you. Bye. Austin, looking good. Yeah, you get it done or you gonna do it now? Okay, you do it now. What do you think about including Anika's words at the end? Is that too?
I was going to. Do you want me to?
Yeah. I just don't want to. Include the words. I just don't.
So, a question for the intro, right? So it's going to be like an intro picture with the words.
Yeah.
Should I do picture of the whole team like a Loma, or should I do picture of Unica? Unica looks nicer.
I didn't mean Anika. Don't use the crummy picture of Anika. My head blocked.
No, right. But should I start with like an intro, like a picture of Anika and you, like George, or should I start with? But I'll do that again at the end. Should I start with the Point Loma, the whole debate team?
Yeah, whole debate team.
So Point Loma, you think?
Yeah, Point Loma. You have that Point Loma. I have it on my computer.
I'm pretty sure you can know. So Point Loma, then I'll do Anika at the end with like when like we transition and her speaking. Yeah, it's gonna be like I'll do it in the next 2 hours.
When do we have to turn in the self-evaluation form?
As soon as you can.
It says review your outline review form, the speech evaluation complete by your instructor.
What?
It says review your outline, the speech evaluation completed by your instructor. But that's not.
Generally try to have.
Okay, I'll turn this in next time so I can do a better job.
Well, no, just like at the end of the
Yeah, I want to talk to you.
Yeah, that's why like.
I thought you did really excellent.
He'll be the first one to tell you, I hate evidence. I
have not sourced anything. I cited like 3 sources in my brief. I actually read out loud 3 sources. For fact, I only read 3. The rest is all. Really?
Did you do your debate?
No, I'm going to. I only read out 3. The rest are like logic based with just the. No, because it's like a bunch of like evidence. It's all.
Did you come to 4 hours?
No, trust me. No.
You put it all back.
I said myself. I run my own study of flipping a coin.
You have the better evidence. But what you didn't do, and I knew it was going to happen, was I knew the policy was going to overcome your question. you didn't focus well enough on the disadvantages to their nuclear policy, and you should have focused on
Pretty much like, I love your fallacies.
what this is going to mean. It's going to mean that you're not getting any net gain from the U.S. doing all this. So it's just a bunch of Malibu liberals thinking they're doing something. It's not going to matter shit. There's no net benefit for the U.S. doing this.
70%, like 70% of causes.
I know, I should have incorporated that. I just thought that it was kind of unfair that they did introduce that because they were focused more on the nukes than actually, regardless of the country.
What year are you?
Second.
You should think about joining the debate team.
Really?
Yeah, you're pretty good.
I'll
You're not giving that to me?
I can't let you keep it.
That's a nice one.
I'll consider it.
What?
I'll consider it.
Yeah, we meet at 6 o'clock on Tuesday and Thursday.